Hello and welcome to Unearth the Past, a brand new family history and genealogy podcast presented by me, Dr. Michala Hume. So this week have I got another treat for you. My guest is an author, a documentary filmmaker, a TV presenter, an archaeologist, and a really nice chap. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome my friend and colleague from a great British dig, John Henry Phillips. Now, before we get into the actual interview, if people want to buy your book, your amazing book called L.C.H, I've put a link in the description below. And also I've put details of the documentary that I'm sure we are going to talk about, No Roses on a Sailor's Grave. So I've put a link to that below. You know, I don't quite know where to start with you because everything that you do in life is just interesting.
Well, thanks very much.
Isn't it? If I said to you, L.C.H. 185, what does that mean? Does it bring you shivers?
No, yeah. God.
I'm referring to a documentary and then a book that John Henry has been, I suppose, has taken up a massive part of your life over the past few years. So let's go back then, and let's go back to the beginning, really. So you are working for a charity. That's right. And the charity is sending veterans that served in the Second World War to Normandy.
Yeah, so that's God, I have to put my mind back. I've not thought about it in a while, actually. Yeah, so I used to, when I started out in archaeology, I did a lot of sort of battlefield archaeology, military history stuff. That was my big passion to start with. And my granddad, who was in World War II, he'd recently died, and I just had this like massive existential guilt that I hadn't asked him enough about what he did during the war. And so I suppose I sort of threw myself into making up for that. And one of the things I did was volunteer with this charity that took D-Day veterans back to France in 2016, I think. It's quite a while ago now. And we got to Normandy, and there's like a complex of hotels, sort of like a holiday village sort of thing. And I'd been left off the rooming list. So I got told to go and ask knock on this veteran's door and ask if I could, he had a spare room, ask if I could sleep there. And I did, and it was this chap called Patrick Thomas. And he was a funny bloke. He looked like your classic World War II sailor, looked a bit like Uncle Albert from Only Fools and Horses, sounded like him a little bit as well. And then, we just got on really, really well. And we went to all the sort of commemorations, and I pushed him in some parades and stuff like that. And I gradually sort of learned his story over the week that we spent together. And he'd been a telegraphist on board a landing craft at Sword Beach on D-Day in the very, very first wave. So they were the headquarters landing craft that led in the first wave of the invasion. And they did that, and they guided in the invasion all day, every wave that came. And then they stuck around for a couple of weeks because they formed a thing called Trout Line to defend the landing beaches every night because the Germans would send midget submarines and stuff like that. And then on the 25th of June, the landing craft hit an acoustic mine, and acoustic mines taken out landing craft sort of left, right, and centre at Sword Beach. And the landing craft sunk and went to the bottom of the English Channel. And off the top of my head, I think it was 35 of the crew died that day. Patrick was one of less than 10, but it's really hard to tell because they didn't keep a crew list essentially. But he was one of very few survivors. And when I met him, as far as I was aware, he was the last survivor of that sinking. And when he told me that, obviously this huge thing of losing all of your friends in the space of about 4 minutes just seemed absolutely horrendous, obviously. But to think that it kind of blew my mind that no one knew about it. If you Googled it, nothing came up. No one knew about it. I guess it was just a forgotten part of D-Day. So I guess I was 25 at the time. So I suppose I was filled with sort of like early 20s optimism and enthusiasm, and I told him I'd build a memorial to his crew and then also find the shipwreck of that landing craft. And that sort of sent me on this insane journey that lasted 2 years, something like that. And I made a documentary about it, and I wrote a book about it. And yeah, that's how that all went.
Wow. I mean, to promise him, not only were you going to get a statue, you were also going to find the ship.
Yeah,
I
at
mean,
the bottom of the ocean.
I think when I was that age, I was probably, too busy thinking about going out and wearing something that resembled, a napkin, let alone trying to do this remarkable thing for this guy.
I was going out at the same time. I was still having
it. You were still living the young dream.
Yeah, of course, God.
Talk me through it then. So when you made this promise, I've watched the documentary. You guys go over. It's not, excuse the pun, it's not plain sailing, is it? So no. You hit a few bumps along the way. I wondered if you could tell me about any of those. What were some of the problems that you faced?
It was almost sort of problems every step of the way, really. Obviously, I couldn't dive to start with, so that was a massive obstacle.
Can we just stop there? I couldn't believe it when I watched the documentary, and I thought, you've promised this guy you're going to go and find the ship, and you can't even dive.
Yeah. Sort of, like I say, sort of early 20s. I don't know. Looking back, I don't know what I was thinking, but at the time, it seemed like the right thing to do. So yeah, I had to learn to dive. So I spent sort of 6 months doing that, something like that, and then put together this big team of divers, and we got very lucky because obviously doing a sonar search of the English Channel would have just sunk, no pun intended, it would have just sunk the whole budget. But we got lucky because someone had already done a sonar survey of the entire stretch of coast. So we were able to access that, which made things a little bit easier, but it's still such an unbelievably hard thing to do, to locate, not just locate a ship, but to identify what this blob is on the sonar. And then even to get down there and identify what this horrendously destroyed wreck is, because all of the wrecks that were destroyed in the war and went to the bottom of the channel, they were then scrapped in the 60s and 70s by the French government, because obviously it just wasn't like history at the time. It wasn't seen as that important. It sounds really shocking now, but I try and see it from their point of view as the 60s. It was only 15 years later, and they were a real hazard to like the ferry and the ships and everything going across. So I get it, but so it was just very, very hard. And then when we got over there, obviously the boat broke on day one.
I saw that you had problems with the engine.
Yeah, the engine just sort of exploded at sea. So we ended up getting a French fishing dinghy, which was about half the size, and it was flooding. We had to like bail out the water as we were heading out to sea. No one could speak French. Such an English thing to do. Went over there to do this expedition, couldn't speak a word of French.
Yeah, and nobody speaks French. Yeah.
So all the sonar equipment was in French, so we didn't know what we were reading. What else went wrong? The French sort of authority sort of banned me from diving at one point because I didn't have enough qualifications. But I managed to get around it. So I still went down there. I'm trying to remember what else went wrong. Everything went wrong, to be honest. And then, I mean, do I give away the ending of the film? I don't know.
I'd actually say don't give it away. Sorry to interrupt. Just a quick note from me. If you are enjoying this podcast and you would like to support the making of this podcast, please visit my Patreon account. It's www.patreon.com/Dr. Michala Hume. Don't forget to make sure you download the podcast if you are listening to it. And if you are watching it on YouTube, please like and subscribe. Thank you. That way you will be kept informed every time I release a new episode. Now back to the podcast. Never tell, right, whether you thoroughly love this or whether you're like, every episode you're thinking, I'm not doing this again. Because I see some of your social media and you're kind of like, I never can tell if you have like a love-hate relationship with being on telly.
No, I like being on TV. I like doing that sort of stuff. Yeah, no, I like it. It's just tongue in cheek, isn't it? It's funny. It's funny.
Can I just say, you are very good at it as well.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, we all need a bit more John Henry on our screens.
Well, we'll see what happens. Some other things in the pipeline at the moment, actually. But no, I think sort of it took me a while to get back into the TV stuff because No Roses, it was just so stressful. And I was very young and doing because to go back to the original question and tie it in, when I made the promise to Pat to find this ship, that was like a genuine thing. I wasn't thinking about TV or documentaries or anything like that. It was just I wanted to do this thing for my mate. And because I was signed to this production company, I happened to mention it to him on a passing comment. And because I was already signed to them, suddenly like this is nice of them. Really, I'm grateful for it. But within like a couple of weeks, they were in England, and there was like cameras in my face, and we were doing this documentary. So it was this bizarre balance where I genuinely was looking for this shipwreck in real life, and then at the same time I was making a documentary and working full time in commercial archaeology. So it was just this like insane juggle of doing all these really intense things all the time. And obviously, like when we do TV now, you're not that. Well, like when you do something like the Great British Dig, you're not emotionally invested in it. I'm not Roman. It's archaeology.
Yeah.
But I was very, very emotionally invested in No Roses, and so you get this weird balance where the documentary team are trying to make what they want to make, and then it's my life, so I'm trying to veer it in the most appropriate way for my life to be. And then so it was just a lot. So it took me a long time to get back into the TV stuff. Actually, I was sort of very just tired out. Archaeology, I quit that for, for a very long time.
Did you quit that? Why? Why did you quit that?
It was just the whole thing. It was just stressful. I just needed a break. I moved to Canada, grew my hair long.
I must say, if you watch the documentary, you will notice that John Henry has a very short cropped hairstyle, and not as much beard. I'm just going to throw it out there.
Well, this is a new thing, the long beard. Actually, this is like a last couple of weeks thing.
If you watch the Great British Dig, you'll know that John Henry has the best hair on the Great British Dig by a country mile.
Thank you very much. I mean, Tasha's got very lovely hair, so I'm going to take that compliment.
Yeah, Tasha, to be fair, Tasha is coming in a close second, but definitely, it is like a shampoo commercial when on our breaks, isn't it?
Except for when it rains when we're filming, or when we're filming in a seaside town. My hair can't hack salt air, so like I was most of the show I was sort of wearing a hat behind the scenes until the second the camera comes on and I take it off, so that I've not got this max.
I think so. I've done this would have been my second season, but because for those that don't know, I'm a 19th century historian, so it's whenever we sort of do the 19th century, maybe early 20th century digs that you'll see me in the tent as the sort of the historical expert. But John Henry is on it all the time because you're one of the main archaeologists, main presenters on the show. So you did the full series, didn't you? So I was only with you in Bognor Regis, which I've never been to Bognor Regis before. It did not disappoint. It was everything I thought it was going to be and more.
It was good, wasn't it? Yeah, you from Bognor Regis. You think, I don't know, but no, it's nice, very nice.
Yeah, I really, really enjoyed it. Apart from the fact it bucketed down, didn't it? It rained for most of that week. I think at one point I was on the beach eating an ice cream and it was absolutely teeming down. But just because I was in Bognor, I felt I had to have an ice cream.
Yeah, obviously I had chips. The last episode we did in Strelly, which I think is near Nottingham, isn't it? that was a
I don't
complete
know.
washout. I'll be excited to see
Was
the
it?
edit for that. It was
Yeah.
brutal. Days and days and days of rain, and like the trench was just filled to the brim of them. They had to get a pump in. It was one of those
Oh my
situations.
goodness.
Yeah, people were stressed. The producers were stressed.
Well, can I just say, folks, if you haven't seen The Great British Dig, please check it out. I think, is it more for? You can catch the old episodes on, and I think the new episodes are on Channel 4. Don't quote me on that. I don't know, John Henry, do you know more than me?
Sure, we actually announced the airing of it, and then it immediately got delayed. So I hear it's coming in the summer. I know the old episodes
Yeah.
now are on YouTube, but
Oh,
officially on
great.
YouTube, not a leak or anything. Like Channel 4 have put them
Yeah.
on YouTube. Yeah, except I'm
Yeah,
not
and
in
if you
those.
want to see, no, John Henry is not in those. However, I am. So
So.
forget John Henry, right? You need to check out, where was I? Oswestry
Yeah.
and A Prison in Devizes. Check those out. By a mile, the best episodes of the whole season, if I do say so myself.
Ever. You went to,
From what I can remember, didn't it rain for the whole week? We filmed the first
there was a lot of sitting
episode of
around.
Great British Big.
There was a
There
lot of
was a
sitting around.
lot of sitting around, wasn't there? And I think in between takes, we were playing with Hugh's dog. Do you remember when he
I
brought his
do.
dog?
Yeah.
When he brought his dog to set. And I was telling you that when I'm not doing the history, when I've not got my history hat on, shall we say, I am researching people's family trees and helping them out, trying to reconnect them with the past. You had a really interesting ring on, which was amazing. Your sovereign ring, and we were chatting, and you were telling me about your Gipsy ancestry.
I don't
So
have it
I
on today.
wondered if
You should have
have
told
you
me.
not got it on?
I don't,
Oh
sadly, no.
God. Obviously, I've done a lot of family trees. I've done a lot of Romany family trees, traveller family trees. So did you always know that part of you, or was it something that you learnt when you sort of did a bit of research and looked into your past?
No, it's just always been me. It's just who I am. I think that was I didn't used to talk about it too much because in terms of my career, back when I was doing sort of the original documentaries I did, because it just didn't seem that relevant. So I think when I did start talking about it professionally, people thought it had been some sort of discovery, which was really funny to me because it's obviously just, it's just my life, isn't it? I mean, it's that funny thing where, like, people say like ancestry or heritage, but it's not really. My mum was literally born in a trailer, so it's literally just my family and my family history and stuff like that. So yeah, it's always been there. Very proud of it. Even talking like that seems sort of unnecessarily removed because it's literally just me.
It's just you.
That is,
Yeah,
that
it's
is my
literally just who
background.
you are.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I must admit, when we were chatting about it, it wasn't something that you were trying, that you didn't want to talk about, was it? It was like, this is who I am, like it would be for anybody talking about their ancestors or whether from or what makes you, I guess.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So have you looked into your family tree? Have you gone back further? Now, I know because I've done several family trees of traveller members and Romanys and Gypsies. And can I just say, they are notoriously difficult to find just because records are a problem. Have you looked into your background? Do you know how far can you go back?
I personally haven't, but I did have an auntie who did go quite a way back, had someone look into it all, and we had a family tree made up. And I know some other members of my family have done like really extensive family trees. But the one I've seen, God, off the top of my head, it probably goes back sort of like 200-300 years, something like that. So quite
Wow.
good in terms of sort of Gypsy history, because I know that's obviously, a lot of them couldn't read or write and things like that, and didn't record sort of births and things like that. So yeah, I think it's quite a good one. Although also, like, when you grow up in that sort of background, obviously the oral histories and sort of family stories and stuff like that are so massive anyway. So I don't think it's such a massive thing, family trees per se, because you've always got these like tales being told. So people from the past are always sort of alive, anyway, in a strange way.
I think it's true with a lot of family trees that you research when the records aren't there, that the written records, there is always that oral tradition. So it's the family tree has been passed down, but it's just been passed down from sort of generation to generation to generation. Part of the reason is obviously because gypsies, they moved around, didn't they? They moved around a lot. So it was hard sort of keeping records. And also, I don't think many people are aware of the persecution aspect. Often, if you were, you wouldn't want to say it on an official record because of that.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, people were so unaware of just how persecuted gypsies have been historically and now. In the 1500s, there was a thing called the Egyptians Act, and that essentially made it hangable offence to be born a gypsy, a Romany gypsy, and it's sort of been ongoing ever since then, right up until last year, the Police Act 2022, which sort of kind of put the final nail into nomadic way of life. So it's been constant and consistently rolled out. So you're absolutely right. People would be reluctant to perhaps even fill in censuses or certainly record their situation on a census. And I think that's still an issue now. I work in policy when I'm not doing TV and book stuff. TV and book stuff. So I work in policy for a gypsy organisation, and you can see the growth in the censuses of the last 10 years of how many people have started to feel just slightly more comfortable with putting their ethnicity on it, which is obviously a promising thing, but it still massively underestimates how many of us, I should say, are here. Yeah.
If there is anybody out there who wants to search their Romany gypsy heritage or their traveller heritage, the Romany and Traveller Family History Society is a great resource, and they have a lot of records online, and I think you can also join them as well. So if you are interested in tracing your Romany gypsy traveller background, please do check them out. They've got some great resources on there. If anybody is trying to trace their ancestors, there are things potentially you may look out for. Popular surnames, for example, such as Boswell, Lee, Smith, Gray. These are all surnames that I know I've come across in my research and are quite popular surnames. There are many more, by the way, so don't think, oh, well, my family doesn't fall into the category. That may not be the case. Make sure that you do your family tree and go off your family tree. In census records, you might be looking for things such as tent dweller, van dweller, no fixed abode. It may give you an indication that your ancestor is of traveller heritage. But don't forget, these people were often persecuted. Some of the ways that they made money were, for example, fortune telling was illegal, so you may not see that. So these are all things that you need to bear in mind if you are researching. Can I just say, it is quite funny because I'm 19th century, right? And archaeologists love things that are not just old, but like really old, don't you? So on my episode, it was kind of, there's a bit of glass, but you guys like really, really go deep, don't you? You want the really sort of old stuff.
Well, you know what? You are right normally, but I don't. I like sort of more modern stuff. So I always come a bit unstuck. When the older we get, the more I'm like, oh God, my knowledge is dropping away here. So obviously I started off in sort of World War II, World War I archaeology, which is very modern. And then nowadays I sort of do my little Romany archaeology project, which is sort of 1800s, 1900s. So I don't really go much further back than the 1800s in terms of archaeology. So I mean, a lot of people would probably say I'm not even an archaeologist, but I've got this. So you can't take that degree away.
Exactly, and that's all that matters. So while we're on the subject, you want to tell the listeners about your Romany archaeology project, because it does sound fascinating. I know we have spoke about it before when we're not recording. So
yeah, I started a little non-profit during lockdown, which got lottery funding, and it's called Romany Community Archaeology. And at the moment, the pilot project is in the New Forest, and essentially we take Romany kids, traveller kids, and their parents who sort of might not have the best sort of situations or like outcomes and educational outcomes and things like that. And the idea is to take them out of a classic, typical educational environment, get them to become archaeologists. Essentially, teach them archaeology, and we do that through excavating a site in the New Forest where there was a former Gipsy compound. So it's a really nice little project. We work with the local museum. We're making a film about it. We have artists and all sorts of things like that. It's very pleasant. And no one's really ever done Romany archaeology before, which is a nice. It really sort of worked out well, really. Yeah, it's a good thing.
And what sorts of things, can you reveal what sorts of things that you've been finding? You know, have you found anything of real interest?
Well,
And how are the kids taking to it? Are they enjoying it?
It's really early days at the moment. We had a lot of delays because of COVID and stuff like that.
Okay.
And then obviously, as you know, with archaeology, it's like seasonal, so we've had to wait. But from the initial sort of events that we've had there, things sticking out of the ground, because they were there for like decades, and it's one of the rare opportunities you get travellers and gypsies to be in one place for a very long time because they're in a compound. And so we've had something. The most exciting thing for me that came out was a piece of Amari pattern porcelain, and in gypsy and traveller families now, most people will have sort of Crown Derby Amari pattern plates and cups and all sorts. They're sort of in display cases and stuff like that. It's a real cultural staple, but they're made by Crown Derby now because they caught on to the want of this particular pattern. But what was really amazing was sticking out of the ground in this compound was one of the really early sort of late 1800s original pieces of Amari that had been brought over from Asia. So it's this really, really amazing, perfect example of sort of what we were trying to achieve, which was to show people that it's this like really beautiful and deep-rooted culture in Britain that goes from now, right back to 500 years ago.
Now, can I just say, when you stood up then, John Henry, I noticed something of importance behind you, and I wondered if we can just talk about it for a minute. So, for those that don't know, John Henry has created the most amazing book, and it's called The Search, and it's based on the documentary that we spoke about earlier. And I just wondered if you can just talk to us just a bit about The Search. I know it's just been, I think, released in America. Is that right?
It has indeed.
So it wasn't that long ago. It has. Yeah. So if anybody is listening in the States, you will be able to now get it in America, which is fantastic. So can you just tell us then a bit about The Search? So when did you start writing it? How long did it take you? And did you enjoy the process as well?
Yeah, so the search is sort of my pride and joy. Being an author was sort of my first passion. Writing's been the sort of only thing that I've consistently loved and wanted to do throughout my whole life.
John Henry, can I just say, why is that then? Sorry to interrupt, but why is writing been your passion? What do you get from that maybe you're not getting from the making documentaries or the archaeology? What is it that you really enjoy about writing?
I do enjoy being on television and making documentaries and archaeology. I will point that out.
Yeah, but by the way, I'm only kidding, but go on.
I don't know. It's just the only thing I was sort of any good at school, I suppose. The only thing I sort of was effortlessly
right. Okay.
Like one of those annoying kids that did sort of no work and then would sort of like boss it right at the end. And English was always the thing I was most capable of doing that with. And to be fair, it took me years to realise I could actually be a writer. Then I started off writing for music magazines. When I left school, I started a band with my friends, and then we did mildly okay. We went all around Europe touring and stuff like that. And then after that, I started writing for music magazines.
Do you play an instrument? Do you play an instrument?
I do.
Go on. Guitar. What do you play? Wow, guitar, I love that.
Can you not see them all behind me? Peeking behind me.
In fact, you know what? I'm sure it's all coming back to me now. Did you not bring your guitar on
I
set with
didn't.
us?
No, Chloe brought one and got me to play it
That
to
was
her.
it. That was
Yeah,
it.
I
That
would
was
never
it.
bring a guitar on set like David Brent. There's absolutely no way.
No. No, I just remember this guitar on set, and now you've said you're in a band, and I'm thinking,
That's
did
why
you?
I
Yeah,
made.
I do remember
I let
this.
that slip. I let that slip to Chloe, so she brought it in. And then she brought a
So for those that
ukulele.
don't know, well, for those that don't know, Chloe is another presenter on the Great British Dig, Chloe Duckworth. So you've said that, writing is a real passion of yours, and it's something that you've always done, and annoyingly, you are good at it.
When I started the stuff with Pat and the search and all that, it was always going to be, if anything, like I say, I was never thinking about TV, but I
Yeah.
was always thinking I'd like to write this as a book. And so that was always sort of how I envisioned it. And the documentary, I'm really proud of the documentary, and I think it's really good. Can I say that? That came out very easily, didn't it? And I
No,
think it's really
you know
good.
what though? You should be proud of it. You should be proud of it because it is good. It's fantastic, and it's got everything in it. You've got a suspense because you don't know whether this thing is actually going to happen. Things go wrong in it. It's emotional. There are just magical moments in there where, as a viewer, you are gripped. So you are right to be very proud of your documentary.
Thank you very much. I think it's good too. But the thing with the documentary is obviously I'm in it and I produced it, but I didn't edit it or sort of produce the final product
Yeah, of
of it.
course. Yeah.
So it was really important for me to sort of tell my personal side of the search.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's so much more to it than you see in a sort of 90-minute film.
Yeah.
It went on for 2 years, obviously. We know how much filming we do just to make a 45-minute episode of The Great British
Mm-hmm.
Dig. Literally takes a week. So, so No Rose
Yeah.
was, 2 years searching for that shipwreck. And it was so much more of a personal thing. And I sort of took, like I say, I moved to Canada and I lived in just off from the Rocky Mountains. And sort of took a long time to sort of process what had happened with that shipwreck search. Because as you remember from the film, it was a very emotional time. And what you don't realize in the film is the last scene where I'm in Patrick's house telling him the outcome of the shipwreck search. That scene, that is 6 months after the scene before it, because everything was just so intense that we all just had to like take a big step back. And so I look quite different. I've lost a lot of weight, and like I look sort of a bit shell shocked by the time I do that last scene, and a bit sort of fed up. And that's just because, like I say, it was just a massively emotional thing. And so it was really important to me to sort of write about that and sort of process that as a book. And so the search is sort of that. It's about, I think there's 4 or 5 history chapters that follow the Glenn craft from being built in New York, goes right through to sort of Bermuda, takes part in the invasion of Italy and Sicily, all sorts of stuff. It just goes all over the world. Then it picks up Pat, and they go and train in Scotland, and then they do the invasion, D-Day and things like that. So it follows that through over 4 or 5 chapters, and then the rest of the book interspersed is the actual search for the wreck, and that's like a memoir essentially, which sounds very lofty when you're only 31 that you've written a memoir, but it is, and it's a funny one. It's a real emotional book. What's funny is whenever I meet people that have read the book, people tell me they cry when they watch No Roses, and I sort of get that because there's the music, and like TV, we sort of push people's emotions, don't we? But when I meet people and they tell me that, and they've cried at the book, I'm always sort of amazed by that, and pleased with it as well, because I think it's harder to make people cry in words, and that's the sort of book it is, I think. And I often wonder what people think when they sort of, a really like hardened military history fan sort of buys the search, and by about chapter 12 they're like, why does the author just keep crying all the time? I don't what is this? I wanted to learn about tanks and guns and stuff, It's just like this existential crisis over 350 pages. But I'm very proud of it. That's sort of exactly what I wanted it to be. It's a real sort of emotional roller coaster. It goes into sort of like my granddad, like losing him, and then a lot of that sort of like early 20s, like having this desperate fear of not leaving an impact, which sounds so silly now when I look
Mhm.
back at that, but at the time, that was sort of like the most important thing in the world to me. I don't know why. I mean, I don't feel like that now, but at the time I did, and so I sort of just explore all that and sort of very lofty ideas in the book, but it's not as pretentious as it sounds.
I have your book on the Kindle. Um,
Very nice.
and I thanks. You don't get as much profit though, do you, if it's on the Kindle? I know that from my books. I'm like, please, everyone buy the hard copy, and even better, buy it off me. Those that don't know, obviously, Pat, we've spoke about him quite a lot in this podcast because he is a real key player, isn't he, in the documentary and the book and what happened. And how would you describe that relationship? Like, what does he mean to you?
Gosh, yeah, it's a funny one. I think that's why the story is so unique, because like lots of people have looked for lots of shipwrecks, but not many people have
Mm,
looked for a shipwreck with the survivor there. And he was essentially looking for it with me. He didn't go down to the bottom of the ocean, but he was pretty much there for every step of it. There's a scene in the documentary where it's sort of, I don't think you can tell, but it's about 4 o'clock in the morning in France, and he comes straight off the ferry to the expedition headquarters, and we show him footage of the wreck and stuff like this. And it's, the guy was 96 at the time, and he's sort of knocking back
mm,
wine, in the middle of the night. So it's very sort of, I don't know, he's a real character, and it meant a lot to me at the time to sort of have that friendship, because like I say, it was very quickly off the back of sort of watching my granddad deteriorate in about a
mm,
week and just get very senile very quickly, and it sort of really shocked me at the time. I sort of dealt with grief and stuff before, but I'd never sort of watched someone sort of deteriorate in front of my very eyes, and that really sort of put the fear in me at the time. Um, and so sort of having that friendship with Pat sort of allowed me to, I don't know, heal from that a little bit, I suppose, and sort of make up for what I didn't have the chance to do with my own granddad. And I think Pat, he was very sort of grateful to have someone of my age at the time sort of take real interest in what had happened to him. And he was always just, I never ever did it for thanks from Pat or anything like that. But
yeah.
he was so just unbelievably grateful that people just even cared enough
Mm,
to um to do all this thing. Like you say, there was a massive team behind it. We had lifeboats, dive teams, and film crews, and the mayor, and the whole town. And we went on the One Show, and just like all these mad things that happened at the time. And
yeah.
he was just absolutely stunned by the whole thing. Um,
I, I think what comes across as well in the documentary is how much you care for him and how much his feelings are taken into account. I mean, there's quite a frank conversation there about the state of the wreckage, and should you show him, what is his reaction going to be when he sees the wreckage, and what the wreckage looks like. Um,
Yeah,
so
and I think that was, to be honest, that was why it was such an emotional thing. When I talk about the sort of stress of making the film, it was because um, I cared a lot about Pat as my friend,
mm,
and I was very wary of not upsetting him. Obviously, it was obviously going to always be an emotional journey. There's no doubt about that, and he knew that
mhm,
we were going to be, turning up sort of traumas that he'd probably locked away for 75 years. And I was very conscious of that, and I felt sort of very uneasy about it at times. And that was where a lot of the sort of difficulty came with making the film, because um, trying to not drop people in it. Sort of, I was very protective of him, and there was
mm,
times where, like, television, obviously they want certain reactions, and they want to see people cry, and they want big drama and stuff like that. And it was, like I say, it was my life, and it was actually Patrick's life, and I
mm,
was very concerned about upsetting him, and also sort of concerned of the sort of what right did I have to churn up those emotions and drag up all these families' traumas. Part of the thing in the book, which we don't do in the film, is I tracked down, I think it's about 20 family members of all the crew, 20
Right.
families of all the crew, um,
Mm-hmm.
and and it was really sort of shocking stuff because I found the sister of someone who died, and she still had his photo on the mantelpiece from 1944, from just before. She was essentially still waiting for him to come home because he was still missing, and just things like that. And there was a lot of sort of who guilt of like who am I to be like ringing up these people saying, oh, by the way, I'm gonna dive on the wreck where your dad died or your brother died, and things like that. So it was a very human based story, very human emotion based story, and I was very conscious of that and protecting Pat as much I could from that, because at the end of the day, it was a genuine friendship. I think sometimes people would see it and think, "Oh, that's like orchestrated for the telly," but it absolutely isn't. I mean, I don't go around hanging out with old men left, right, and centre. Like that was just a very rare
Yeah.
incident. I made friends with
Mm.
Pat. Um, so yeah, I don't know. I've done a lot of thinking about it over the last 7 years. Still processing
Yeah,
it, to
I
be
think
honest.
you know what I think that definitely comes across. Even when you're in his house and you're sort of saying, "Do you want a drink? Do you want a cup of tea?" Um, that friendship I think definitely comes across, and I think that's what makes it so emotional. Um, Especially when you see men like Pat and what I think it hits home, and you say it in the documentary about your age when you're filming this and his age when he was on board that boat and what he must have gone through on board that boat, and probably things that, like you said, he's not spoke about it. It's those things that you keep to yourself. And I know part of the reason that I got into genealogy and family history was because I wanted to understand my granddad more. And
Mm,
he just passed away at the time, and there were questions that like my mum couldn't really answer because the things that he just didn't talk about, and the war was one of them. The reason that I started on my journey as a historian and the reason I did a PhD and all the rest of it was because of family history, because I wanted to know more about my grandparents, and I think my granddad in particular. And a similar journey with you, as in you lost your granddad, and this was sort of a journey of, I don't know if maybe self-discovery is a bit of a strong word, but it was a journey that you went on that maybe made you think. Would you say that, before we finish, and I'm conscious of time, we are going to finish now because I know that you have a life, a showbiz life. Um,
you know.
so before we finish, what would you say, like in terms of impact? What would you say that the search and Pat has had on your life?
Well, massive. It had an absolutely massive impact on my life. Like you say, I mean, my journey sounds very similar to yours because I was just playing in a band when I was 19, 20, and then because my granddad died, I went on this whole journey of going to these battlefields to see where he'd been, and then through that I became an archaeologist, and then because I was an archaeologist, I met Pat, and then the Great British Dig, and then the book, and all this
Mm,
stuff. So absolutely, without that, I wouldn't be anywhere where I am now. And the funny thing is, one of the things in the book is obviously I went on that journey to find Pat's ship and to
mm,
kind of make it up to my granddad. But after that all finished, I had a bit of free time. And I thought, you know what? I spent all this time looking up someone else's granddad's history. I've never actually looked up mine. And I
mm,
knew bits. He used to tell me bits and pieces. Uh, I knew that he'd been an airframe fitter in the war. Um, he used to talk about that and working on the planes and stuff like that. And he was in North Africa and things. And I knew little pieces like that. And then sometimes he'd mention sort of how he'd seen his friends drown, and that would be very sort of stark and just out of nowhere, and it didn't make sense because he was an airframe fitter. And then he'd mentioned
mm,
once he'd seen a couple of his friends blown up, and again didn't make any sense because I thought he was just working on planes. And then yeah,
mm,
just after No Roses, I started looking into his history, and I got his RAF records, um,
mm,
and I found out that he'd actually left his role as an airframe fitter, and he'd volunteered to join the RAF Servicing Commando unit, which is essentially just commandos, but
Right.
in the RAF.
Yeah.
And then I looked up their diary, their war diary, and all this, and it was the freakiest thing because there'd only been 4 people in their unit that had died. 2 of them had drowned, and 2 of them had been blown up when they kicked a mine by accident. And so it was just like this like goosebumps moment where like these weird little stories that my granddad had let leak out. Turned out it was all to do with this, and it was literally right there in front of me in the archives. So it was mad. And I suppose to answer your question, Pat and the search and No Roses, I mean, it's absolutely changed my life. I mean, I wouldn't be doing any of the stuff I'd be doing now. I'm giving a talk at Glastonbury next month, and sometimes I think like,
I know, I can't believe that you get all the best gigs. I mean, Glastonbury, how does that even happen? And you are going to Glastonbury. First off, well done for getting a ticket. And the second thing is you can actually see John Henry on a stage. Do we know what stage you are on or what day?
It's called the Achin Tan. It's like a big wagon off of a big pole, and that marks the stage, and it's on Thursday at about 2 p.m, I think. But that's I did it last year as well, and that's one of those moments where I got to see Paul McCartney. I love the Beatles, right? Absolutely.
Can't believe it. Good.
Yeah, and I got to see him play Let It Be. And because I was given a talk about archaeology at Glastonbury, and remember watching Let It Be and being like, this is mad. How have I ended up in this? And that's before I even did the Great British Dig. I came home and then got booked for that. So it's been a weird few years.
Well, if there's anybody listening from Glastonbury, from their booking team, if you need anyone to talk about, family history, genealogy, the Victorians, please give me a shout. I am available the whole weekend. I am here for this. Can I just say, John Henry, look, I've kept you way longer than I promised. You are a fascinating individual and everything you do is interesting. So keep up the good work, and thank you so much for jumping on the podcast. So that is it for this week. Thank you so much for listening. I really hope you enjoyed it. I will release a new podcast every Monday and a new video podcast on YouTube every Sunday. Thank you so much, and I shall see you again next week.